Hey everyone, welcome to the new studio and welcome to this week's video. Today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy 15, but before we get too deep into that, please smash that like button and punch that subscribe button, and you know what, while you're down there, bing bong that bell. It's kind of cringy when you actually have to say it. I put a ton of work into this video and it is by far my longest project, so I would appreciate any support you can give me. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the spiel. Let's talk about Final Fantasy. To say the very least, November 2016 was a very eventful month. And at the end of that month, Final Fantasy 15 was released. I had never played a Final Fantasy game, even though I grew up with a PlayStation 2. I was just too young to get into Final Fantasy. I spent my time with things like Battlefront 2 and ATV racing mainly. I still to this day have not played 7. I know, okay? Bring this all the way around to December of 2016. My school's Christmas dance was coming up and I had just recently been dumped. I couldn't just simply ask anyone at the dance either, as it was a girl's choice dance. Mega sad boy hours were inbound. In my sorrow, I managed to find out about an Overwatch tournament. I can't remember if I was the one who found out about it or if a buddy of mine suggested it to me. Regardless, we rounded up our fellow cucked losers and made up a team. The tournament was being held at my local Microsoft store, and so in between our matches, we gotta dick around the store and look at stuff. We gotta check out a bunch of video games, PCs, VR headsets, printers even, all the cool shit. And in our escapades, I came across Final Fantasy 15. I'd seen some advertisements for the game, and my interest was already piqued a little bit. It was an action RPG rather than a traditional Final Fantasy game where it's turn-based. With some coaxing from one of my buddies, I ended up purchasing the game that night. And in case you're wondering, we did win the tournament. I'm far too good at Reinhardt to let my team lose. After what turned out to be a really great night, I went home and started installing my new game. And this is where my journey with Final Fantasy 15 begins. I will be talking about some basic story elements to start. However, it's going to be pretty minor. I'm not really going to address any major spoilers to start. I'm going to mainly talk about characters in the game and aspects of the game that I liked. However, when I do start to talk about the story and there will be spoilers, I'll give you a heads up. If for some reason in 2022 you still haven't played Final Fantasy 15 and you really want to, I'll make sure I'll let you know before the spoilers happen. Regardless of that, I'm not so sure spoilers really would hurt the experience of Final Fantasy 15. I've beaten Final Fantasy 15 twice now, and even on the second playthrough, the story beats were still strong and hit hard. Let's start with the opening of Final Fantasy 15. I adore the opening to Final Fantasy 15. The game starts by throwing you into hell. The world around you is on fire, and in the center of the arena is a large demon. All of your companions are in combat, each taking turns to help Noctis in the scene. And then it cuts to a stunning cutscene that lays the base for our story. Prince Noctis is to be married to Lady Lunafreya, and it's time for him to head to his wedding. To help protect and guide Noctis, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladio are all joining Noctis on his journey. The four have history. They've been friends for years. And after a send-off from the king, the crew is on their way, only to have their car, the Regalia, break down. The only way they could get that hunk of metal moving was by pushing it to the nearest repair shop. And so the crew pushes. You get to control Noctis for this part, and I really like that they let you take control during this scene. You're just holding forward on the controller to move the car forward, and it moves slow. It really feels like you're pushing the car. If you don't press forward, then the car doesn't move. Sounds pretty boring, right? Well, you're not just pushing the car in silence. Everyone is pissed and bantering and arguing with each other. I love the banter here. It really shows off each character's personality. Prompto's complaining is loud and annoying. Gladio threatens to kill Prompto if he doesn't shut the fuck up. Noctis is being a little brat. And Ignis is vibing in the driver's seat, having a good time. The character interactions here never fail to make me smile. Once you've pushed the car forward a bit, a gorgeous cover of the song Stand By Me by Florence and the Machine plays. I love this so much. This cover instantly went on my playlist. It adds a lot of character to the scene and even lays the base for a lot of the game's themes. The lyrics reinforce the idea that this group, despite bickering and arguing, will always stand together. The lyrics state, "When the night has come and the land is dark,
and the moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. This banger of a song is originally from the 60s and was written by Ben E. King. The song and lyrics fit super well with the themes and the story of the game. I feel like they started with wanting to use the song in the game, and then wrote the story around the themes and the song's lyrics. That's how well it fits. And that's the opening to the game. This is one of my favorite openings to a game, and thankfully, a lot of the game is just as strong.
Besides Noctis, we have 3 other main characters. They're with you for the vast majority of the game. On occasion, one character might leave for a moment, or Noctis might do a solo mission with a side character. But these moments are pretty few and far between. Being that you're with all 4 of these characters the whole game, it's pretty important that they're pretty well done, and I personally think that they are. Let's start by talking about our main character and player character, Noctis.
Noctis Lucius Salem is the heir to the throne, but he doesn't really show it all the time. He can be whiny at the beginning of the game, but he definitely grows a lot throughout the story. Even though he is royalty, he treats his friends as equals. He doesn't look down on them or talk down to them. Frequently, he relies on them and trusts them fully. It's clear that he respects his friends as equals. Being part of the royal bloodline gives Noctis access to some unique abilities that his companions lack. He can warp across large distances to escape or attack, blink through solid objects, and Noctis can use the royal arms. The royal arms are a set of magical weapons scattered across the map. They're hidden inside the tombs of former kings. Each of these are powerful and unique weapons. My personal favorite was the big ninja star. In order to get these weapons, you typically have to navigate through a dungeon while fighting through all the enemies you come across, culminating in a boss fight at the end. These weapons are powerful, with the cost of damaging you as well as your opponent. I like these weapons. They add a fun risk and reward element, while also providing you a unique playstyle for most of them. On top of these weapons, Noctis can also use every type of weapon in the game. The other characters are limited to certain weapons, while Noctis is able to use each one. My typical loadout was the standard sword, daggers, some kind of spell, and a king's weapon. You can actively change what weapons you're using at any time. Enemies have different resistances based on the weapon you're using, so switching weapons to get peak damage on an enemy is pretty important. If you're looking to do big damage and delete an enemy, then Noctis has you covered. Noctis gets access to the ability called the Amagir. This ability takes a few battles to charge up, but when it's charged, Noctis enters sicko mode. He summons every king's weapon you've unlocked up to that point and then goes ham on whoever he's attacking. You can end this ability with a super strong attack where the whole party attacks together. This ability is great for hard fights, and it's also super fun to shred a group of weak enemies with. It's satisfying to have a whole troop of Magitech troopers drop from a ship, only for you to press left and right bumper and delete them. Oh, I almost forgot. Later in the game, Noctis can sometimes ask God to come nuke the battlefield. All in all, Noctis is a great main character with a lot of fun and unique abilities.
Next up, we have Prompto Argentum. I love Prompto. I love all the characters, yes, but Prompto has a special place in my heart. Prompto's been friends with Noctis since high school, and it is impossible to forget about Prompto.
Prompto is very loud. He loves to complain, he loves to talk, and he loves to ask you to pull over for a photo every 5 seconds. But he isn't annoying. Well, okay, I won't go that far. He can be. But when you dive into who Prompto is and how he feels, you start to better understand his character. Fully understanding his character puts Prompto in a new light. On my first playthrough of Final Fantasy XV, I managed to trigger a really sweet interaction with Prompto. I was staying the night somewhere in the game when Prompto approached Noctis. Characters will come speak to you one-on-one sometimes, typically with a small side quest. Prompto typically asks to take pictures somewhere, but this time was different. I was staying at one of the motels spread across the map when Prompto asked to talk. You have the options to say no and just go to bed, but I was interested in what Prompto had to say. Noct and Prompto climb on top of the motel and start to talk and reminisce. A couple times in the conversation, one of the dialogue options will be to suggest to call it a night and go to bed. I almost ended the conversation when I decided to press further. If you do, Prompto dives deep into his insecurities and explains to Noctis how out of place he feels in the group of friends. He isn't royal like Noctis, he isn't strong or a well-trained guard like Gladio, and he's not as smart as Ignis and can't cook. He feels like dead weight and an outsider. But when he's with the three of them, he feels better at times, but inevitably feels like he doesn't belong. You have options on how you want to respond to him, and if you played Final Fantasy 15 and chose to tease Prompto over his insecurities, you can kindly go fuck yourself. If you're a good person with a heart, you can choose to reassure Prompto. Noctis tells him that he is good enough, and he does belong. It really helps Prompto see his value, and he heads to bed in a much better mood than before. This is one of my favorite moments in the game. After this scene, I've always viewed Prompto in a new light. Sure, I still get annoyed when I'm trying to do a quest and he really wants to pull over for that damn photo, but it bugs me less. I know he only wants more memories with his friends. There's even more to Prompto's story here, but we'll talk about that when we get to the DLC. Oh, yeah, did I forget to mention? Final Fantasy 15 got a few DLCs based around the other main characters. Each is a solo story focused on that character. They're a super cool addition to the game that I really enjoy. But again, more on that later. For now, let's talk about my boy, Ignis.
Ignis Scientia. Okay, first off, I get Ignis is the smart guy, but did they really have to use science for the root of his last name? It's a little on the nose for me. Anyway.
Ignis is the party's resident cook and driver. He's been friends with Noct since they were kids and works as a servant to the King's Guard. Frequently throughout your adventure, your ears will be graced with his beautiful voice saying the most iconic line. That's it! I've come up with a new recipe! As you venture around the world, you'll come across more ingredients and recipe books. And sometimes, when you find something new, Ignis will say,
I've come up with a new recipe.
When camping, you're able to pick a recipe for Ignis to cook. Each gives unique stat boosts that last for a period of time until the next day. I really enjoyed grinding out a lot of quests, but not turning them in. Then I would eat a meal that triples the amount of experience you gain from quests, and then proceed to turn in all the quests. That's what I call stonks. Ignis is normally pretty quiet and reserved, but he isn't afraid to banter with his friends. Like Prompto, there's more to Ignis, but we'll get to that later. Last, and definitely not least, is the big muscle man, Gladio.
Gladiolus Amaticia is a member of the King's Guard and Noctis' personal shield. Gladio and Noctis have been friends since they were kids, and Gladios' father actually acts as Noctis' father's personal shield as well.
Gladio has his head on straight and tends to act as the rock in the group. He's willing to say things when they need to be said, and he is never afraid of a fight. Gladio is typically a happy and cheery person. He's the type of guy you'd be afraid of if you just saw him. He's tall, strong, and has some absolutely sick tattoos. But if you were to speak to him, you'd quickly realize that unless you give him a reason not to be, he's a pretty nice guy. Despite his overall nice demeanor, whenever he is needed, Gladio is quick to act with his massive sword or powerful shield. He's more than just muscle and doesn't just hit things though. Frequently when driving around, Gladio likes to kick back and read. Gladio has a little sister named Iris who we see from time to time, and she even gets a pink chocobo, which I found pretty cute. Like the other characters before, I really loved Gladiolus. The whole cast and crew does a fantastic job of weaving together a team that feels like a family. Each character at face value fits a role. Gladio is the muscle, Ignis is the brains, Prompto is the fun, and Noctis is the prince. Each character does a lot to break out of their roles and really carve a unique space for themselves. Alongside these four is the fifth main character, the Regalia.
In case you haven't picked up on the context clues, the Regalia is the cast's car. At the start of the game, Ignis is the driver and simply acts as a form of automated transport to quest locations. As the game progresses, Cindy will provide you with side quests for additional parts for the car. Some of these are cosmetic, while others have a direct impact on the way the Regalia works. A few of the more basic upgrades do things like give the car a new paint job, increase the Regalia's max speed, or increase the fuel efficiency of the car. Some upgrades are a little more intense though. The most impactful of these upgrades in my opinion are the wheels that unlock the Type D Regalia. I never did this questline on my first playthrough, so I figured these wheels would just be cosmetic. Imagine my surprise when I suddenly have a fucking monster truck. These wheels allow you to drive the Regalia almost anywhere, and it's a ton of fun. My favorite thing to do was jump over oncoming cars, or just drive straight over them. Always made me laugh. Past the Type D Regalia is the Type F Regalia. This bitch has wings! This is a post-game upgrade you can get for the Regalia, and as I'm sure you imagined, it can fly. Zooming around was pretty fun, But it's not the most useful thing in the world because by the time I got it, I had already completed the vast majority of quests and side quests. It's cool, but I will say the Type F Regalia is more of a gimmick than a usable tool. It's pretty hard to land sometimes, and if you don't land properly or crash the car at all, you get a game over and have to go back to your previous save. I found this really frustrating a few times. On top of that, I had all the parts for the car after completing the main story, but the quest to actually get the Type F Regalia never unlocked for me. I ended up having to replay the final mission in the story because of the bug. And while I liked the final parts of the game, it was pretty frustrating to play through that last hour and a half long section again just to get a kind of shitty gimmick. I found it way easier just to fast travel to finish some post-game content. There is an exclusive dungeon that you have to fly to in order to play through, but besides that, I was kind of frustrated with the lack of added value that the Type F Regalia provided. I'd definitely say the Type D Regalia is the most fun way to use the car by far.
Final Fantasy XV took a huge departure from the franchise by changing things up from a turn-based combat system to an action RPG-oriented battle system. I still love turn-based RPGs, don't get me wrong. It's a type of gameplay that I'll always have an itch for. Games like Persona 5, Pokemon, and Octopath Traveler will always have a place in my heart. But I think moving to an action RPG system was a very good move for the Final Fantasy franchise.
Being able to fly and phase around with Noctis was always fun. I especially loved the dodge. It felt so clean when you successfully dodged an oncoming attack. With Dark Souls, yes, we're comparing an action RPG to Dark Souls. I'm super original. The rolls feel very frantic. If you mistime the dodge, you're going to take a big hit with major consequences for dying. The dodge in Final Fantasy gave me a completely different feeling. Instead of feeling like a frantic move to survive, a well-timed dodge feels like an absolute Chad flex. The feeling I got when I landed a dodge was more similar to the feeling I got when using the Mikiri counter in Sekiro. Noctis phases slightly to the side just enough to avoid the attack. You can then instantly counterattack the enemy. It's fast and fluid and feels super good when you get it down. I'm not comparing the difficulty of Dark Souls and Final Fantasy XV combat systems. I brought up the comparison to emphasize the difference in the feeling the dodge in Final Fantasy XV provides. I really think the dodge key was one of my favorites. Combat is more than just dodge, of course. You have access to a variety of weapon types throughout the game. Your party members can only use a few. Gladio uses great swords and shields, Ignis uses spears and daggers, and Prompto shoots guns and uses machinery. Noctis, on the other hand, has access to the entire arsenal. Each enemy is weak to certain weapons and strong against others, so it's really in your best interest to have a variety of weapons equipped. I love the basic sword the most. I like the flow of combat so much that as long as I dealt neutral damage, I'd opt to use the sword over any other weapon. In combat, you also have access to spells. Throughout the world, you can collect magical energy for fire, ice, and electric type spells. You can combine the elements together to create stronger spells and add various items into the brew as well for even more added effects. On top of that, yes, there's more. You have a tech bar that fills up as you deal damage and take damage. The tech bar lets you call on one of your party members to use a special powerful move. Each character has a few different ones you can unlock throughout the game, and each has a unique situation that particular skill can excel in. And if you use them in the wrong situation, they can genuinely hinder your DPS. So use it smartly. Or don't. It's fun either way. On top of all that, you have summons that you can perform on occasion. Later in the game, you can call upon literal gods to just kill everyone for you. They're pretty sick, and I loved using a summon when I really didn't need to. That level 5 enemy better watch out, because I will summon Zeus on their ass.
It's time for that good old spoiler warning, because we're about to talk about the plot of the game. I won't be doing an insane deep dive on every detail of the plot, but I am going to be spoiling pretty much every major moment. So if you're not interested in having those story beats spoiled, then thanks for watching, I guess. Like and subscribe. For the rest of you, let's get into it.
As I said before, Final Fantasy XV starts with Noctis and gang heading out to his wedding. The car breaks down and everyone is forced to push it into Hammerhead for repair. Once the car is all fixed up, the crew is able to head to Galden Quay where they find out their boat hasn't arrived yet. Forced to stay the night and wait for the boat, the crew rents a room in the nearby hotel. That night, the Crown City is attacked by the opposing nation of Niflheim. King Regis, Prince Noctis, and Lady Lunafreya are all pronounced dead. This caught me off guard when I first played the game. The opening does a really good job of setting a warm tone and then quickly brings the reality of the situation to light. The moment when the characters find out their home is gone is a pretty powerful one. You really feel the gut punch that the characters are all enduring. King Regis actually got murked in the attack, but Lady Luna is chilling, and Noctis is obviously still alive as well. These events naturally hit the crew hard. Their home has been conquered in one fell swoop. Noctis and crew receive a message from Kor, who is a high-ranking member of the Crown's Guard, and he asks the crew to meet him at an old royal tomb. Here, Noctis learns of the true goal of his mission. His father knew of the impending attack and sent Noctis and his friends out of the city on purpose. He wasn't just being a good dad though. Noctis is tasked with collecting the royal arms all around Eos in order to acquire the power needed to take back the throne and his home.
So now that you know the basic introduction of the plot, I want to talk about moments inside of the plot that I really liked, instead of just writing what you could just read on the wiki. First mission I want to highlight is shortly after we left off.
The boy band has made it to the city of Lestalem, where they run into the handsome man Arden. Arden gives me hair envy. Noctis has been having headaches because there's this big-ass titan calling to him. Arden somehow knows what's going on and offers to help the crew. Obviously suspicious, the crew cautiously accepts his offer for help. They find out pretty quickly that Arden is with the Imperial army that's attacking Noctis' home. In fact, he's the Chancellor. Main bad guy introduction aside, I like this mission because you get to fight a fucking titan. You have to repeatedly dodge or parry his blows until eventually you blow his entire arm off. The lead up to the fight I really enjoyed because it builds the bond between Noctis and Gladio. They have some serious character interactions here that really wake Noctis up. It's the start of Noctis starting to accept his kingly duties. Around the same point in the game, you get to do a fun little date quest with Gladio's sister. It's not really a date, she's just showing you around the city, but she definitely felt like she was crushing on the prince at least. It's a fun break in the story and it always makes me crack a smile. The next quest I'm going to highlight is actually one of the DLCs that Final Fantasy got. In particular, episode Gladio. After a fight in the main story doesn't go as smoothly as Gladio would have liked, he leaves the crew to become stronger. It's time for his anime training arc. Gladio is looking to become stronger so he can act as a better king's shield for Noctis. In order to do this, he calls up Kor. Kor is the only one to take on the trial of Gilgamesh and come out alive. Over the past 30 years, everyone else who's attempted the trial has perished. Needless to say, only the best can survive the tempering grounds. Kor is very concerned if Gladio is ready because, again, everyone else who has attempted this trial has been killed. Gladio assures Kor that he can do it, and the two enter the tempering grounds together. In episode Gladiolus, you get to play as Gladio. Gladio's gameplay style is pretty unique. Instead of phasing around past enemies like Noctis, Gladio uses his shield and greatsword to crush foes. Using his shield, you can block incoming attacks, and as you successfully block attacks, Gladio's rage meter builds. The rage meter is directly correlated with how much damage you do. The higher the rage, the harder you hit. I like this a lot because it really rewarded watching the enemy's attacks and playing a much more defensive game. It felt good to land a well-timed block and then immediately counter-striking with a powerful blow. Gladio has access to a feature that is pretty similar to the tech bar in the main game. Gladio's Valor bar will build as you fight just like the tech bar. Depending on how much Valor Gladio has, he gains access to powerful moves that can do mega damage at the cost of draining his Valor bar. Throughout the dungeon, Kor and Gladio will take a rest where you can eat a cup of noodles and chat with Kor. For anyone interested in learning more about Kor as a side character, this is a great touch. You can see the bond between the two of them grow as you play through these discussions. While Kor helps you fight in most of the encounters, there are many times where he lets Gladio go it alone. These points are the points directly tied to the trial. Kor will help get Gladio from point to point, but when it comes to fighting Gilgamesh and completing his tests, Gladio is on his own. Gilgamesh himself is a really fun fight. At the start of the dungeon, Gladio gets his ass kicked by him. Gilgamesh warns Gladio that if he isn't ready, he will pay with his life. Despite the high stakes, Gladio's iron will drives him forward so he can become the true King's Shield. Gilgamesh will switch between a few different combat styles throughout the fight with him. It really pays to watch his every move because he will frequently surprise you. In the fight, Gladio gets a new scar but ultimately comes out victorious, gaining Gilgamesh's respect and becoming the second person to survive the trial. This DLC is a great break from the main game and a fun side mission. Back to the main story. The next portion I want to talk about is a major part of the story. For a few chapters, the crew is trying to get a boat fixed up so they can go to Altissa so they can meet Lunafreya. She has the ring of the Luci that King Regis had given to her before the attack on the Crown City. Noctis needs the ring in order to fulfill his kingly duties and to dispel the darkness. On top of that, Noctis also needs the power of the Leviathan. Once the boy band fixes the boat, they sail to Altissa where they get to see Lady Luna speak to the people. Noctis meets eyes with Lunafreya and it's a sweet moment. They don't get to interact more here, but it's the first time they've seen each other in years. They've kept in contact but have been oceans apart. You can really see the light in both of their eyes when they see each other. From here, Lady Luna begins to summon the Leviathan to ask her to grant Noctis her power. Gladio, Prompto, and Ignis are all helping evacuate the city, while Noctis attempts to battle the Leviathan. Noctis is not strong enough to meaningfully do anything here, and during this time, the handsome devil Arden shows up and stabs Lady Luna. In her weakened state, she calls upon the souls of the past kings to empower Noctis. They grant Noctis their power, and you get to fight the Leviathan again, but this time you're far stronger and able to actually battle the beast. This fight is a really cool spectacle and really satisfying to play. I will say, the fight seemed to drag on a bit. I feel like it'd be much better if the Leviathan's health bar was a bit smaller, but it is a god, so I guess I get it. But either way, I like this fight. After defeating the Leviathan, she grants Noctis her power. Noctis passes out at the end, and Lady Luna heals him with her dying breaths. We get this stunning scene where her spirit visits Noctis and passes on the ring to Noct before she passes on. This part is super sad. Rest in peace, Lady Lunafreya. While we never got to see much of her in the game, we get a lot of backstory between the two and get to see the bond between them in various cutscenes and flashbacks. I teared up here for sure. The immediate follow-up is really heavy as well. We cut to a train a few days later and the tone is very tense. We learn here that not only did we lose Lunafreya, but Ignis was blinded during the battle as well. Watching Ignis fight during the next few sections really hurts. His viability is really restricted because he's blind. He's slow and doesn't really do much in the fights. It's really sad. That's all we really get in the main game regarding Ignis's blindness, but during episode Ignis, we get to play as Ignis during the events of Altissa and find out what really happened to him.
I never got to play episode Ignis on my first playthrough of the game. I can't remember if it's because it wasn't out yet or if I just didn't purchase it, but either way, this was my first experience with episode Ignis. Episode Gladio had story elements and character arcs inside of it, but it felt much more like an arcadey side mission rather than an integral part of the story. Episode Ignis, on the other hand, takes place during a very vital part of the story with dire consequences.
Episode Ignis consists of 3 chapters. Chapter 1 starts after Noctis has defeated the Leviathan. Ignis, Prompto, and Gladio all recognize the gravity of the situation and start moving to the ceremony site to help Lady Lunafreya and Noctis, who are both collapsed on the podium at the moment. Ignis gets separated from the other 2 after the bridge they're running across gets destroyed. This is where the game starts. You play as Ignis and get access to his elemental daggers. You can change the element that they're imbued with at any time. Fire is great for taking on a single target, ice rips through groups of enemies, and lightning lets you zip around quickly. On top of still having a tech bar, Ignis also has a total clarity meter. Total clarity is Ignis' signature finisher, and once it's charged up, you can do a really cool big attack based on what element you have equipped. My favorite was the lightning finisher. Ignis pretty much Thors everyone he struck with the electrical daggers. Ignis' final unique feature is his damage multiplier. Gladio increased his damage meter by blocking attacks, whereas Ignis increased his by getting consecutive hits in. On occasion, Ignis will get knocked down, and if you're quick enough with the button presses, you can counterattack and get some health back. So it's pretty much like Bloodborne. The first chapter of the DLC, you jump around Altissa, taking out squads of enemies while trying to reach Noctis at the altar. To help you move around the map, Ignis gets a hook shot. So maybe episode Ignis is more like Sekiro? Jokes aside, chapter 1 is fun. You only have to clear out a few areas of Altissa in order to progress, but I was having enough fun running around and fighting as Ignis that I decided to clear out the whole map. Once you choose to move on, Ignis jumps in a boat and starts racing to the altar. Zipping around Altissa on a speedboat while an all-out war is going on around you is super cool. Unfortunately, before Ignis can reach the altar, one of the commanders leading the siege on Altissa shows up. After a big boss fight, Ravis shows up and just kills the commander. It seems like you're going to have to fight Ravis, but it turns out he's willing to work with Ignis. Ravis is choosing to betray the Empire in order to help save his sister, Lady Lunafreya. This starts Chapter 2. Chapter 2 consists of Ignis and Ravis fighting through masses of enemies and taking down massive mechs together in order to reach the altar. Unfortunately, by the time the pair reaches the altar, Lunafreya has passed on. Ravus is understandably upset about his sister's death. In his rage, he tries to kill the unconscious Noctis. Ignis, of course, steps in. Now you get to fight Ravus. This fight was cool. You get to battle Ravus in the middle of the sea while the city burns around you. Once you defeat Ravus, he calms down a bit and grows to accept what happened, and he begins to understand why his sister did what she did. It's beginning to look like things are over when Arden shows up. Chapter 3 starts with things looking bleak. Ravus gets blasted away in a single blow and Ignis has been subdued. While Arden is monologuing, Ignis gets the strength to break free and in the struggle gets his hands on the ring of the Luci. This part made me laugh a bit. Ignis kinda just screams and keeps screaming even when he's on his feet. Knowing that he doesn't have the power to defeat Arden by himself, Ignis puts on the ring of the Luci. Earlier in the DLC, Ravus shares with Ignis that he has a prosthetic arm because he put on the ring. If anyone who isn't the Chosen King tries to use the ring will do immense damage to them. Ravus had his entire arm burn away. Still knowing the dire consequences, Ignis is willing to sacrifice it all to save his friend and brother. Ignis battles with the ring for a moment, and this is when it happens. His face is ablaze. The ring blinds Ignis, and the game has a super incredible visual to demonstrate this. We see things from Ignis's point of view, and we watch his vision burn away. Even lacking sight, the ring gives Ignis immense power and the final boss battle commences. Ignis versus Arden. The last fight against Ravus was cool. Now, add on top of that a superpowered Ignis and a demigod going head to head. The fight is challenging too. Arden has a few attacks that if you don't dodge successfully, Ignis will lose a ton of health. Wait, maybe episode Ignis is more like Dark Souls then? Once you successfully repel Arden, Ignis stumbles over and collapses next to his friend. Gladio and Prompto finally arrive, and episode Ignis ends. Episode Ignis has an alternate ending you can get if you play it again, but to be honest, I looked it up on the wiki and that was good enough for me. I more cared about the canon stuff. If the alternate ending interests you, go play episode Ignis. It's a super fun DLC that adds a lot of character insight into Ignis and his relationship with Noctis. Oh, and Ignis kept giving me hair envy as well. The third and final DLC I want to talk about takes place shortly after the events of episode Ignis. It's been a few weeks since Ignis lost his sight and Lady Luna passed on. The crew is still very much reeling from the events. This section of the game starts with the crew on their way to Niflheim, and the tone here is really well done. You could cut through the air with a knife. Everyone is depressed and still very much struggling with the previous events. Unfortunately, things get even harder from there. The train gets stopped by an Imperial attack, and during the attack, Noctis and Prompto end up chasing after Arden. During the fight, Arden uses his illusion abilities to trick Noctis into pushing Prompto off the moving train. This is where episode Prompto begins. Episode Prompto is the least fluid of the 3 DLCs when it comes to combat. When playing as Prompto, you get access to a variety of weapons. Prompto's pistol is the default weapon, and honestly, it's not fun to use at all. In order to land your shots effectively, you have to stand still a lot, because if you're running around and shooting, you'll miss some of your shots. Prompto's melee sword isn't much better. It does okay damage, but Prompto is mainly a gunner, so his kit really doesn't support melee combat. Thankfully, throughout the DLC, you get frequent access to much stronger guns. A sniper rifle that can one-shot most enemies, a bazooka that does surprisingly little damage sometimes, and a submachine gun. The submachine gun is the one I found myself using the most. The rocket launcher was hard to use and hard to aim, and it really didn't do the damage output I wanted on big beefy enemies. It does fine at wiping the floor with basic enemies, but it's not my favorite. The sniper rifle is pretty good. Even without landing a headshot, it one-shots almost all enemies. The problem with the sniper is it only gets 5 shots before you're back to the basic pistol. The submachine gun does decent enough damage and has 100 rounds before you drop the weapon. I understand why the guns have an ammo limit. The sniper would be really overpowered with infinite shots, but the limited ammo killed the flow of combat for me constantly. The main pistol is really, honestly unusable. So when my side weapon ran out of ammo, I had to run off and find another weapon lying around somewhere. Gladio and Ignis had such fluid combat systems that really rewarded using their unique playstyles, whereas Prompto's gameplay loop was shoot till you're out of ammo, then fuck off and find another gun. Rinse and repeat. While I didn't really like the gameplay of episode Prompto, I do really love the story here. The themes of Prompto's DLC really help enforce his character arc throughout the game. In the DLC, we learn about Prompto's true origins. The Magitech soldiers are all clones of their creator, and Prompto is one of them. He was stolen from the facility when he was just an infant and was adopted in Lucian by a loving family. Prompto has an Auschwitz number on his arm that he's been hiding his whole life. His friends have no clue about his origin, and it just adds to and supports Prompto's feelings of being an outsider. Constantly, the DLC is emphasizing that Prompto feels alone. The DLC starts with Prompto trekking through the snow by himself. The game makes you sit through this for a minute before Prompto passes out in the snow and is captured by Imperial troopers. The opening sets a great tone for the DLC's story and themes. Prompto is alone, or at least he thinks he is. From there, the DLC actually begins and we get to play as Prompto as he escapes the Imperial base, and through his escape, he learns a lot about his origins. All of the Imperial soldiers are clones of the same man that Prompto is also cloned from. So when we first see test tubes filled with Promptos, it's pretty shocking. We also learn that the clones are essentially imbued with demons. Pretty crazy stuff. I really like how they show how much this impacts Prompto. Later in the DLC, Prompto has a hallucination where he sees himself as an Imperial soldier, and you have to run from Noctis while he tries to kill you. It's a sobering moment because it puts the reality into light. If Prompto hadn't been taken from the facility, he would just be another soldier that would just end up getting cut down by his now friends. By the end of the story, Prompto accepts himself for who he is. He accepts that he can't control where he came from, but he can control what he does and what he chooses to be. The DLC ends with Prompto teaming up with Aranea to take down a massive Magitech machine before heading off to rejoin his friends. The final boss fight is kinda ass, to be honest. You're just shooting it with a railgun for like 10 minutes. I couldn't help but think of the purple worm moment in the Adventure Zone here. If you get that reference, you're cool.
Episode Prompto is definitely the weakest of the 3 DLCs. Despite that, I think it does a fantastic job at deepening Prompto's backstory and making his character arc have more impact and more value. The final part I want to talk about is Chapter 14, the ending of the game.
Noctis tried to use the power of the crystal in order to destroy all the demons. However, when he approaches it, he gets sucked inside instead. 10 whole years later, Noctis emerges. His friends are gone and the world is covered in darkness. Demons are everywhere. Eventually, Noctis manages to get a ride with Talcott, who is driving by. Talcott was just a young kid at the start of the game, so seeing him here fully grown really hammers in the fact that Noctis has been gone for a decade. The world has succumbed to darkness and demons rule everywhere. There is no light anymore. Prompto, Gladio, and Ignis all spend their time hunting demons. Ignis is still blind, but has learned to manage. Talcott informs Noctis that they're all at Hammerhead right now. Everyone is visibly much older. Gladio's hair is even sexier. God, more hair envy. Ignis has cool glasses now, and Prompto is rocking some facial hair. From here, the final plan commences. Noctis informs them that he has to go into Insomnia and destroy Arden. With Arden's death, Noctis would be able to cleanse the world and bring back the light. The boys are all 100% in, and the final mission begins. Insomnia is in pieces from the siege it experienced 10 years ago. Buildings are destroyed, rubble is everywhere. Oh, and it also happens to be filled with demons and Imperial soldiers. Once the group manages to reach the palace, the final battle begins. First, the group has to overcome Ifrit, who's guarding the entrance. I don't know how to say his name, Ifriti? Whatever. After some help from gods, Noct and crew are able to enter the building. This next section I never got when I first played Final Fantasy XV a few years back. I'm pretty sure it's a Final Fantasy XV Royal Edition exclusive. Before the group can reach the throne room, they must fight through a series of boss fights. Each of these fights are pretty hard. Even when I was a few levels above theirs, you could easily get two-shot if you're not careful. The thing I really love about the boss fights are the finishers. Each member of the party gets an opportunity to perform a finisher on one of the bosses. Once the boss has reached a certain health threshold, you're forced to switch from playing as Noctis to one of the other 3 party members. And from there, you finish off the fight and perform a super badass finisher. I feel like Ignis's finisher was a little lackluster if I'm being honest. They really did my boy dirty. The other 2 kill their bosses after performing the finisher, but with Ignis, you have to fight the same enemy again shortly after the finisher. It just really initiates the second phase. The party as a whole has a really cool finisher on the enemy for the final fight, but it would have been cooler in my opinion if Ignis got to kill his enemy too with the finisher, rather than just starting the second phase of the fight. Oh well, that's pretty nitpicky. Arden is close by and Noctis knows his final moments are coming. The chosen king must give his life to cleanse the world. Noctis and crew have known this the entire time. It's just time to pay that price. Noctis asks Prompto for a photo to take with him so he can still have his friends with him in his final moments. Here, the game lets you pick from all the photos that Prompto's been taking on the adventure. I personally always choose a photo of the boys here, but if you pick Miss Cindy and her features to take with you, I won't judge you too much. This moment is pretty rough. All three of your companions know that once Noctis enters that throne room, they will never see him again. Noctis takes his photo and walks forward to face his destiny. The fight begins with Noctis blinking down from the throne room into the street where Arden is waiting to meet him in battle. The battle starts on the ground in a one-on-one fight between the two fated enemies. After you manage to bring Arden's health bar to 50%, Arden and Noctis both summon their king's weapons and begin to fly around the city while fighting. Super cool fight, not gonna lie. After fighting through the sky, the battle finishes in the courtyard where you fought Friti earlier. Noctis and Arden finish their battle while being watched by the old kings. Noctis finishes off Arden and goes on to finish his duty. Using the power of the crystal and the ring of Luci, Noctis begins to banish the darkness. The old kings appear to give Noctis their power one last time. Even knowing this will kill him, Noctis does his duty as king. After the final blow lands, Noctis is dead. His soul moves on with the power of the old kings, and there they destroy Arden's spirit. With his duty done, Noctis himself moves on. Finally, after a decade of darkness, the true king has returned light to the land. We get to see Noctis and Lady Lunafreya at peace together, finally in the afterlife. The ending to Final Fantasy XV is insanely powerful. The seeds for the finale were planted at the start of the game and were attended to throughout. Seeing the pair sitting together in the afterlife will always fuck me up.
All in all, I clearly love Final Fantasy XV. The characters are all great, with real motivation and good character arcs to each of them. The combat is fluid, fast, and fun, and gives you plenty of customization options that really let you play how you want. Final Fantasy XV also brings together a fantastic story about 4 friends growing together. If you made it all the way through my video and you haven't played Final Fantasy XV, what the fuck are you doing? Go play it! You'll enjoy your time with the game. That's a promise. Thanks so much for watching my video. Do you prefer the 15-minute reviews, or do you like the much longer deep dives into a topic? I'm still trying to figure out what kind of content I'm going to be continuously producing, so any input from you would be great. Either way, make sure to smash that like button and lovingly caress the subscribe button. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.